everyone. My name is Rebecca Sofer, and this is the June edition of our Light After Loss series with 1-800-Flowers. I love doing this series. I've been doing it for more than 2 years now. Every single month, I speak with a different expert or writer or thinker in the field of difficult things, of loss and grief, of empathy building, of figuring out how to move through very, very tough challenges in life and do it while you're building resilience, while you're building community, while you're taking care of yourself, and while you're still able to somehow, stay connected with the outside world around you. These are all secondary things that we don't think about when things go wrong in life, but they're there. And so I'm here for you every month on this Facebook page, talking to someone different. I run Modern Loss, which is a global community and a publication and many books that help people to move through the long arc of grief. And I love working with my partners at 1-800-Flowers because as much as they are known for the fun things, the celebratory things in life, like, yay, you graduated, or yay, you had a baby. There's a lot to send somebody from their offerings. They are very much aware that life is not black and white, that it is so many different shades of gray, and that even with the sweetest milestones or days, there is surely some bittersweet that comes along with it, because loss is very much a part of life. It's the most universal thing that we can go through. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it not excruciatingly painful or lonely, but it's something that happens. And so I'm grateful that they give me a platform to talk about this stuff and not shy away from it. And I'm glad you're here. So we are going to dive into this month's edition, but I encourage you throughout our conversation to please feel free. The comment section is yours. I want you to share. I want you to share any memories, share the names of your people. Talk to each other, ask us questions. We're going to be hopping on later to answer them. And of course, please feel free to go back and watch any one of the many episodes that live forevermore on this Facebook page. Please, we talked to a lot of amazing people. Now, this is June, so there's a lot going on in June. There are graduations, there are transitions. We are mentally shifting into summer mode, whatever that means, right? Hopefully it means a modicum of relaxation or slower pace. And that's all, that can be a little stressful, but hopefully it's also a good thing. Also, Father's Day is in June. We're all aware of this. When you think of Father's Day, at least before my dad died, I used to think of literally just very stereotypically the barbecues in the backyard, him inviting everybody over, him literally ruining every possible thing that you could grill. I don't even know how you can ruin a hot dog, but my dad managed to do this on a yearly basis. And these formed amazing memories for me. He died when I was 34 from a heart attack, and all of a sudden Father's Day took on this new, very complex meaning, a very, very tough meaning where, it was kind of like a time warp for me, a time machine where this day would approach in the calendar. And it wasn't just the day, it was the season. It was as soon as I started seeing the Father's Day ads a month beforehand, my body would brace itself and just to get through it. And so all of this day that had been filled with these amazing memories were filled with yearning and amazing memories and wishes for what might have been, and sadness and, warmth. It was just such a complicated feeling. And so I just want you to know that my guest today and we see you in this complexity. We see you in this, season, which there is no way that it is happy or sad, celebratory or painful. It's just all of the above. That's life. And so we're going to talk about it. Getting through these Hallmark holidays can be a really hard thing. And I'm really grateful for today's guest, Colin Campbell, who's Zooming in with me from, I believe, New York City. Is that right?
Yes,
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 New
I'm
York
in New
City
York
seems
City.
awfully quiet where you're sitting at this moment. So, Colin is a writer and director for theater and film. He and his wife Gail wrote and directed the short film Seraglio, which won the Deauville Grand Prix Prize, also known as Grand Prix, and was nominated for an Academy Award. His web series Deal Breakers is on Amazon Prime, and his beautiful book Finding the Words, Working Through Profound Loss with Hope and Purpose was just published this year. It's beautiful. I read it. It took my breath away. And I'm so grateful that he's here with me. And the reason that you're sitting here with me today, and of course I'll let you go into it, is, just a few years ago, one could say really a nanosecond in the arc of grief in the 2019, Colin
Yeah,
and his wife Gail were hit by a speeding drunk driver. And their two teenage children, Ruby, who was 17, and Hart, who was 14, were in the back seat. And from one second to the next, Colin and Gail went from being parents of two living teenagers to parents of two deceased ones. And if that doesn't send chills up your spine, I don't know what would, because it does every single time I consider it.
mm.
And yet here he is, sitting, dressed. Maybe you even managed to put deodorant on today,
I
like,
did. I did.
and you're writing about your experience as a bereaved parent, as a bereaved partner, as a
Mm.
bereaved creator in the world, someone who writes for a living and creates things. Uh, and so, first of all, thank you so much for
Wow.
being with us today and opening yourself up to talking about this stuff.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
So the name of your book, Colin, is called
Yes.
Finding the Words. And to me, it's a great title because, you know, I'd like to start by asking, is there something there? We don't really have a word in the English language to describe a bereaved parent, right? I have run the
Right.
modern loss community for 10 years now. And I always ask, like, what do you use to describe it? What word do you use? And people use a variety of things that they come up with or they found from other cultures. And one that
Oh.
keeps coming up is the word vilama, which is a
Oh.
Sanskrit word that means against a natural order.
Oh,
And
wow.
so a lot of people in our community use viloma to describe themselves when they are grieving a child who has died. And
Right.
I'm wondering what words, like, have you come up with something, a term, a word to describe yourself?
I haven't, other than a bereaved parent. Yeah, that's what I use. But I like the Sanskrit term. That's a fantastic.
I know. When I first read it, I was like, yeah, I mean, it is against a natural order. And I think that, so frequently we get kind of bogged down in like what our culture, what our religion says to, these are the parameters of our grief and how we're supposed to move through our
Hmm.
experiences with loss. But I'm very much a cultural omnivore. And if there's a word, if there's a practice, if there's a ritual out there that has
Uh,
nothing to do with my day-to-day experience and it helps me, I'm going to glom onto that and
definitely.
dive in. So you write about there are no words, right? Um,
Mm.
Last year I wrote a piece for Time magazine about the phrase "I can't imagine," which is,
Right.
in that same family of people coming to you and saying, "I can't imagine what you're going through." And I love that your book is called this because, you know, I'd like to know, what do you want people to know who might find themselves in a situation where they're trying to find the words for someone who is grieving?
Yeah.
And instead of saying there are no words, there are so many words,
Yeah.
because what would you say?
Well, I'd say first, I think there's a misconception that you're supposed to comfort the person by giving them the words that are going to fix their problem or make them feel better. But in fact, people who are grieving need to feel their loss. They need to feel their pain. They don't need their pain fixed. And so, in a way, it takes a burden off of you. In a way, you're not trying to find the magic word that's going to solve the problem. You're just going to try and articulate how you are there for them. That's the words they want to hear. They want to hear that you're there for them, that you love them, that you also love the person that they've lost, if that's true, hopefully. Um, And that was the most comforting for me and Gail, was when people came to us and just talked about how much they loved and missed Ruby and Hart, and how much they love us, and how much they're there for us.
Now, at the beginning, I'm sure, because even your kids died in a terrible way. There's no other way to put it, and
Yeah,
I'm saying this because I know I'm not reminding you of anything that you're not clearly aware of on a
right,
minute to minute basis, right? And I think a lot of us don't want to say something because we don't
right.
want to upset the person, we don't want to remind them.
Yeah.
How did you navigate like those early days with the people in your circle who would look at you probably, looking terrified to open their mouth and say anything?
Yeah,
And, I
absolutely.
do think, I don't know if you found this, but the onus does seem to be on the griever to make other people in the room feel comfortable.
Yeah. No, I think what's most helpful to me was the idea that the onus was on me to get what I needed from people, to help them help me. So it wasn't about making them feel good or safe or whatever. It was more about like letting them know this is what I need from you, because that's what they want. They want to help me and Gail, but they don't know how. And I certainly didn't know how. I would have been definitely just too scared. I would have said there are no words and backed off. But I think that it's so helpful if you're able to find the words to tell the people in your life what you need. And so that's what I needed. I needed to talk to people in the beginning. And as you said, they came into our house and they were stricken and terrified. They would say something that would make me cry. But I was crying all the time. The crying was fine. And so I wanted to cry. I wanted them to cry. And so that helped me to tell them that, and literally tell them I want to hear about Ruby and Hart, because they thought if they mentioned, like you said, Ruby and Hart, it would remind me of my loss, but I hadn't forgotten.
Right. I mean, and I think that's like, I say this all the time in almost every interview I give, in almost everything, every talk I give, that it's just like the most painful thing for people who are grieving is absolute silence. Are people
Right.
who just make your grief the elephant in the room, that
Yeah.
they are so scared to touch because they're scared that they're going to make it worse. But I always say it's like literally the worst thing has already happened.
Right.
There's no worse than what they're going through. And so
Mhm.
it's better to just say something, even if it's not like the perfect thing. There are no magic words, right?
No.
Even if it's not the perfect thing, even if it's not going to fully comfort them, it's better to say something than nothing, because nothing makes
Right.
someone feel, grief is already such an individual experience. We don't have to make it an isolating one, but we do that in
Right.
our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's community is so helpful to people in grief. And I think that there's a stereotype that, something terrible happens and you go away. You go to your little corner and you
Yeah.
till you're better, then you come
Okay.
back and join.
Yeah.
Right. You go in your cave of grief. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I want to be in community. I want to be sharing this and having people witness and support me. And I didn't know that until it happened. And then it just became so clear to me. And actually, it was really through the Jewish rituals of mourning that I was taught that. I'm not Jewish. My wife's Jewish. We raised our kids as Jews, and so we're active members of our temple, and and the Jewish traditions of mourning were all about community. Sitting Shiva for 7 nights after the funeral. The community comes to your house every night and sits with you. And at first I thought, I don't want that. I want to be in my own little corner, because that is the initial impulse, I think, for many people in grief, is to feel like they need to retreat. It's too painful. But then you realize, well, the pain is coming from love, and it's not so scary to feel that pain. It's not so scary to feel that loss. And it's so helpful to feel it in community. And so each night of Shiva, I discovered that it was so helpful to have a community gather and talk to them and have them tell me stories of Ruby and Hart.
Talking about Always talking about Ruby and Hart,
Mm.
you obviously, this is Father's Day month, and your kids were killed in before Father's Day, right?
Yes, 4 days before
Um,
Father's Day. Yeah, June 12th.
June 12th. And so you have a Father's Day story
I
about
do.
from
Yeah.
2019. Could you share it with us?
Yeah, so actually we had the funeral and we buried them on Father's Day. And I remember there was this moment where we were sitting in our living room and figuring out when to have the funeral, and and the rabbi said, let's do it on Sunday, and then someone said, but that's Father's Day, and she said, well, is there a better time? It's
Yeah.
like, it's, what does it matter? Like, it's this, you bury your children, that explodes everything, right? So yeah, so my children, Ruby and Hart, they were going to give me this Father's Day gift, and they didn't get a chance to. So my wife gave it to me on Father's Day, and it's sweet. It's a hat. It's an in joke. It's a ridiculous in joke.
Mhm.
So it's called Lana Pool Swim Club, and what happened was I told my kids the story when I was a kid, when I was their age. My parents took me to this town in France called La Napoule. And I thought because it had pool in the word, there would be an amazing pool at La Napoule.
Even as a grown-up, I think I'm like, that sounds great. I'd like to swim there.
Makes sense. There's no pool at La Napoule. It's a beautiful, medieval town by the ocean, but I hated it. I hated Lana Pool because there was no pool. I was so disappointed as this little kid. And Ruby and Hart got a kick out of that. They thought this is so hilarious. Poor dad, as a little boy, was so sad. So they got me a Lana Pool Swim Club hat.
Oh
It's
my
like a
goodness.
joke.
And
I
your
just
wife
love it.
knew about it, or how did this?
Yes, yes, she helped. She helped them.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah. So I love my Father's Day gift. It's Lana
It,
Pool. I just
it,
love that it's so silly that they went to so much length. It's so absurd. It's a ridiculous in joke that nobody gets but me and them and Gail.
now I
And
do
it's
want to talk about
sweet.
I want to talk about the role of joy and laughter in your grief, but I also want to talk about, there are probably so many parents, bereaved parents who are watching this, Vilomas, if you will,
Mm.
watching this conversation. And I find that people who are really willing to share their experiences in ways that are raw and vulnerable, that's like you. About an experience that many people shy away from, and or they have this kind of morbid curiosity about it, but they don't want to touch it too close. I think that we get very nervous that we can catch grief if we learn about it too much. But
Yeah,
you're doing this amazing like work, which is very powerful because you have the ability to draw people out of their isolation, make other bereaved parents feel seen, and make them
yeah,
feel like they're not alone in, like, I would say sometimes the insanity of it all, the insanity feeling.
absolutely.
Can you share some of the, you know, some of the tougher moments that 3 years on now, or 4 years on, you are experiencing with regard to your, your losses, your profound losses?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this past, I guess, a week ago now, were Ruby and Hart's birthdays. So Hart's birthday was March 30th, and Ruby's was March 29th. So they're 3 years and one day apart, and that's a hard time. It's a hard time to get through, and it can be very overwhelming 3 years on, even of just the approach to the days themselves, and then after the days. That whole chunk of time feels very challenging. And I've found that the best way for me to get through those days, or to live those days, be present in those days and that pain, is to find some activity, something to do, some ritual to memorialize my love for my children, their lives, their presence in the world. And so every year we try to do something, and it's usually something different. And this year I performed my solo show on their birthdays. So
Right.
I have a one man show, is what I call it, grief a one man show, and it's just
Yeah.
me up on stage, and I'm very raw and open and vulnerable, and also I think funny. There's some dark humor, um, and I thought, well, I want to perform my show in New York, and why not do it on their actual birthdays as a way of honoring them? So that helped me.
So I wanted to ask you about your show, about your
Yeah.
one-man show. You have developed a one-man show called Grief, a one-man bleep show. And the bleep is actually not bleep, it's something else. So just use your imagination. You can find it online, which you call the feel bad show of the year. And I
Yeah.
loved that description. And it's not, me being like, oh, morbidly curious. It's more like, me being somebody who has parents who aren't alive and who
Mm.
always wants to engage with, an artistic endeavor, a movie, a book that shows other people's experiences in ways that are, fictional or nonfiction. I just want to feel seen in this
Yeah.
long arc of grief that I'm going through, of loss. I can't
Yeah.
just do it, say in therapy or in a religious circle. It needs to be part of my daily conversation. And that
Mm.
includes, if I go to see Funny Girl on Broadway one night, I would love to go see a show called Grief, a one-man bleep show, another night. And Modern Loss does a lot of live performances like that. You really channeled your shock and your rage and your anguish into this tragicomic exploration of our culture's inability to talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what kind of reaction you've gotten from other bereaved parents after
Yeah.
performances.
Well, it's quite extraordinary. I didn't know how it was going to go. The show it's very raw. It's potentially very triggering because I go into great details both about the crash and also just about grief and about surviving it, and then the dark feelings. I go to dark places, and then I redeem myself in the end. But I think it goes to what you were talking about normalizing it, about not having it be the elephant in the room, which is so destructive and so isolating and so painful. On top of grief, to have that isolation is so awful. And so, in a way, me just being up there and just letting it all out in hopefully an engaging way, and as I said, a funny way. Um, my audiences have been responded really, really positively, particularly people who are bereaving. Anybody, I've had people come up and tell me about siblings they've lost, parents they've lost, best friends they've lost, children they've lost, and they've all said they're so grateful and they felt so connected to so many parts of my story because there's so much shared pain when we talk about grief, and there's so little talking about it, right?
Right.
And I think you come and you see my show and you respond, you react, you get chunks of it, like, oh yeah, I feel that way too when I'm grieving whoever I'm grieving. And I think it's normalizing and it's comforting to people.
What was your feeling before the very first performance in public that wasn't in front of, say, people was this
Yeah.
like what did that feel like
I-
to ask people to bear witness to your darkest moments, to your deepest connections in life?
yeah. Well, I was scared. I was
Fair enough.
scared.
Fair enough.
I was scared that people might storm out,
Hmm.
honestly. I knew that there would be bereaved parents in the room. I knew that, and there were. Almost every performance has a bereaved parent in it, in the room. And I knew that I was going to say things that, like I said, could be triggering, could be upsetting, I didn't know how they would take it. Nobody's left.
Perfect.
Everybody's been very grateful, and it was very powerful because I have moments in the play that I said are very funny and people are laughing, and then at a certain point it turns, and and also a lot of that humor comes from anger.
Mhm.
Like I was angry in my early grief when I wrote this piece, and it comes out in dark humor, and then the piece turns, and the anger goes away, and it's more about understanding. It's about accepting the pain, leaning into the pain, and then seeing other people's pain. There's like the character I play, who is me, suddenly sees pain in a different way, and other people's suffering in a different way. There's a deeper understanding about it that I think is um, a good thing, and a unifying thing. I think that the audience feels like they've gone on a journey together, and there's a sense of community.
Now, talking about seeing other people's pain and witnessing it, and also, acknowledging that we have our own individual experience with grief. I mean, even within the same family, you and your wife,
Mm,
you both lost your kids, I mean, you're still married, you work together, you do a lot of things together. But you're two individual people who had your own
yeah.
dynamics with each kid, your own memories that some of, either one of you will never have the exact memory. And so I'm wondering, what advice you might give to people who are in partnerships who
Mm,
are grieving
yeah.
in the same person. I mean, what have you learned about grieving as a couple?
Yeah. Well, I think it sure helps to not be alone in grief. And so I think Gail and I, at a certain level, clung to each other. We're the only people in the world that share this particular loss, and it was so helpful to have each other. And then it was helpful to sometimes we were on the exact same track, like we were taking a walk and we were thinking the exact same thoughts, like bizarrely, very specific. And other times we were very different places, and that helped too. If one of us was full of despair, the other person was thinking about something beautiful that had happened to us with our children. That was helpful. So I think, and I know couples that also grieve differently, that they're in different modes of grief, but it helps them. There's strength in the different responses. But I think communication is the key. I think talking about whatever you're feeling about to your partner, to whoever you're with, um, that is so helpful.
What would you say if, say, one partner, one person in a relationship is having an incredibly difficult and different moment than the other? Sometimes it is kind of hard to, when we're in our own despair, to feel
Mm,
empathy or compassion. Sometimes we do get wrapped up in the maelstrom of grief so much. Um,
yeah.
have you learned anything about how to have compassion for somebody else when you feel like you may not have it in you anymore?
Anymore. That's interesting.
I think that there's
I
something
don't.
we hear a lot about people who have like burnout, like just
Oh,
compassion fatigue, you know, um,
yeah.
and it's a lot of people who just feel like an ongoing responsibility to support
Mm.
others around them, whether as
Oh, yeah.
caregivers in a role such as, a therapeutic role or whatnot. And
Yeah.
sometimes we hear in grief communities about people in partnerships who, just grief is exhausting. It's quite
Yes.
literally and understandably exhausting. And
Yeah.
sometimes people do retreat to their own little places where they can't be reached for a period of time. So
Yeah.
if that hasn't been your experience, then that's, I mean, quite frankly,
Well,
that's wonderful.
well, I think the idea of treating ourselves kindly is so important. I think it's so easy to forget to um, to take care of ourselves,
Mm.
and to be compassionate to ourselves in grief. For me, it's so easy to get caught up in guilt, and regret, and those feelings are so difficult and exhausting and self-punishing. And I think even the idea of allowing ourselves to feel joy, allowing ourselves to feel pleasure is difficult in grief. And it's so helpful, and it's such a great counteraction to what you're saying about like grief, burnout, being overwhelmed.
Right.
I think, yeah, if you're not giving yourself the allowance to be kind to yourself, to feel pleasure, to experience joy, then yeah, then you will be burnt out.
The well
Absolutely.
runs dry pretty quickly if you don't.
Yeah,
It's very hard to
absolutely.
draw from an empty well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So kindness to oneself is such a key. Yeah.
I first want to thank Colin for joining us today in conversation. Colin Campbell, his book is just absolutely beautiful, Finding the Words. I highly recommend seeking it out. It's wherever books are sold, Finding the Words, Working Through Profound Loss with Hope and Purpose. It just came out a couple months ago, and I have found it to be very beautiful and very impactful. If you can catch him while he's performing his show, Grief, a one-man bleep show. You can check out his website, and we'll be posting that in the comments as well. And Colin, I just want to thank you so much for joining us and ask you, Father's Day is approaching. This is a
Yeah.
day which you have now shared with us has held some of the most beautifully happy memories of your life and some of the most incredibly gut-wrenching ones that a human being can experience. You buried your kids on this day. You probably had celebrations on this day. You probably got a couple macaroni bracelets or picture frames 20 years ago, on this day.
Yeah.
Have you thought about, you're a busy guy, but have you thought about how you're going to spend this Father's Day?
Well, I think I do know what I want to do. I think I'm going to go out to the desert. So we have a house out there. It's a house that we were going to the night of the crash, and it's a house that Ruby and Hart helped choose. And it's in Joshua Tree, and they love Joshua Tree. And so I think I'm going to go out there and with my wife, and we're going to look at the rocks that Ruby and Hart loved, and try and celebrate the life that we shared with them, and then also be present in our current life at the same time. So joy and grief together. That's what I think that day will be.
It's a lot to hold at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not easy, but it seems like that's the deal, right? That's what we
That
got.
is
So
the deal. That's
let's
what we
do the best
got.
we can with it. Yeah.
I'm really just very moved by your work. I hope to find the words to describe how I feel about what you're doing. But I think that if I could say one, it would be connectiveness. I mean, you're connecting us and you're
Oh,
showing us how to help people who are going through a variation of this theme of grief. And thank you.
mm, oh,
Um,
thank you.
so thank you so much, Colin. I wish you a meaningful Father's Day. I wish everybody out there a meaningful Father's Day. Please, again, feel free to share names, questions in the comments. Feel free to share who you're missing. And I will see you next month for our next Light After Loss edition. I'm Rebecca Sofer. Thank you so much for joining us.